coffee.
I'll give it 10 minutes and the frogs will go back in the drain. I guarantee it. I don't know, 50 metres from down here up to where the drain is, and they're obsessed with it. Happy New Year, folks. It is a gorgeous morning here in the northeast of England. It's like 13, 14 degrees or something, and the sun's out and things are drying up a little bit. We had a fairly awful December, in all honesty. One of the reasons that I haven't got a lot of videos out is that the weather's been a bit too bad to film things. I've got a lot of videos that are kind of pretty much ready to go, but just need little extra bits here and there. But when it's been as dark and dreary and dismal as December was, it's kind of nice to get up on a New Year's morning, 2022, a whole new year. And man, I can only hope it's better than 2021, because I didn't particularly enjoy 2021. Don't get us wrong, loved all the work that we've been doing on the renovation, but there's been a lot of other stuff behind the scenes. I'm not going to go into it, but I think for a lot of people, 2021's been a hard year. And if anything, I need 2022 to get back to some form of normality, because we can't go on living like this forever. Anyway, it was such a nice morning. I thought it's a shame not to share this with you on New Year's Day, and to just give you, well, we are going to be looking at rainwater management, which is a video that I filmed a couple of months ago, but it needs a couple of like little extra bits added to it, which I'm going to do today. Hopefully get this whole video out today. If you want to just skip forward to the rainwater management bit, that's absolutely fine. But I just wanted to have a little bit of a natter with you guys because I haven't done that in quite a long time. Please tell us down in the comments, what was 2021 like for you? What does 2022 have in store for you? I've just noticed where bluebells are starting to sprout. Wow, that's pretty cool. I'll keep an eye on them. So yeah, we had a fairly typical, fairly relaxing Christmas and New Year. There has been family stuff going on in the background that's been quite difficult. Not going to go into it in public. I did lose my mojo for video making a little bit towards the end of 2021, but honestly, I feel like it's the start of a new year and I'm ready to rock. I just can't wait to get going on the renovation again. There's so much to show you. I've got this massive backlog of videos. So all the videos are about 2 or 3 months out of date because I can't keep up with the editing. If you imagine a typical video takes, what, 2 to 3 days to film and edit, and when you're trying to also do a renovation and run a business in the background, it is a little bit tricky. So I've got a whole load of videos that I kind of filmed but not quite ready to go yet, and one of them was obviously this rainwater management video. And I did also want to get a slightly more interesting video out for you on New Year's Day, namely the one all about how much the renovation cost. But again, that is a complicated and big video to film. It'll take me about 3 or 4 days to make that video, and at the moment I've got most of it done. I've got the script written. For that sort of video I have to write a script because there's so much stuff to remember. If I try to do it off the top of my head like I'm doing at the minute, I would just miss loads of stuff out. So for stuff like that I have to script it, follow a script, and try to make it less obvious that I'm following a script. But yeah, that video will be coming out very, very soon. If you can't hold your water, head over to the member zone and you can have a look on there. I've already made a video about it ages ago about how much the renovation costs. So if you can't wait to find out, head over to the member zone. You can watch it on there. But if you're happy to wait another week or so, hopefully I'll get that video done. So yeah, for today we're just going to have to make do with a video that I filmed a couple of months ago. We had only just started on the renovation and the walls were just starting to come up at the back, and we were getting some pretty torrential rain. So we'll rewind a little bit back to kind of October time, but all that leaves me to say for now is Happy New Year to each and every one of you. Have an amazing 2022. Be nice, be kind, and be prepared for a whole string of extension videos after I've got this video out. Covered in shit. It's raining. I mean, it's Britain, so it's probably going to be raining at some point on your construction project. And in this video, I did want to have a bit of a chat about rainwater management when you're doing a building project. Hiya folks, welcome back to the show. Rain stops play on our extension project. It's just too rainy to do anything, but I thought it's a really good opportunity to show you just a couple of tips from my perspective of things you can do to make life a little bit easier on the build to manage rainwater, because at the end of the day, you know, we're in Britain and it rains. I do genuinely believe that well-managed rainwater makes a difference between a building site that's either a pleasure to work on or quite dangerous and a nightmare to work on. So wherever you are in the world, hopefully you can pick up a few tips from this, and hopefully you can give me some tips as well and pop them down in the comments below as to what you do to manage rainwater on a construction site. Now, I am waiting for scaffolding to arrive, so if I get interrupted, I do apologise in advance. But one of the first things you're going to have to deal with is all the water that comes down off your roof. And as I say, all we're talking about here is smaller, you know, domestic building projects and stuff like that. Generally, all the stuff that I'm going to be talking about here is the responsibility of the builder. But if you're doing a self-build extension or a smaller construction project, smaller building project, you might end up having to look after this sort of stuff yourself. So this is just some of the stuff that I've picked up over the years, really. So one of the first things, as I say, is dealing with the huge amount of rainwater that gets collected on your roof, and what are you going to do with that? Perhaps your rainwater drains have had to be disconnected temporarily while you're working on the build. For example, we used to have a gully down there, but the gullies obviously had to be taken out because this is now going to become part of the internals of the house. So what I have done here is we've got the main downpipe coming down from the roof there. That runs off onto that little flat roof section, and then that runs down that pipe there. And all I've done is I've put a really, really long kind of downpipe thing. It's on a diagonal, but you've just got to be careful. If it's too shallow an angle, it can end, because it's not amazing joints on these sort of pipes. So if it's too shallow an angle, it can end up dripping out the joints. But so keep it at a fairly decent angle so the water actually runs away. I've got that running off into the garden, and you want to get it as far away from the property as you possibly can. And you know, if you've got a bit of a back garden, just let it drain onto the grass or something like that. It'll be absolutely fine. Just try and get it as far away as possible. And what I'm using here is elephant trunking, or temporary rainwater downpipe it gets called. You buy it on a roll. I'll include a link in the comments below. But it's just a tube of clear plastic stuff, and you attach it on to the end of your downpipe with a zip tie, and then your water just kind of flows through it. It does tend to blow about a bit in the wind, so what I do is I run it through the odd little bit of cut-off pipe and just pop a couple of bricks on the cut-off pipe, and that just stops the plastic from blowing about everywhere, because otherwise it just gets in your road. But that'll just happily just drain into the garden, and that's your roof rainwater kind of taken care of. Needless to say, you need to keep your bricky happy, and you need to cover all of your bricks and blocks. Water makes bricks and blocks much harder to lay. It makes them heavier. It means the mortar doesn't really stick to them properly, and you really don't want to be laying with wet, especially wet concrete blocks, wet trench blocks and that sort of thing. A typical 7 Newton concrete block weighs in at about 16 kilograms when it's dry, but you can easily add 2 to 3 kilograms per block for wet blocks. So over a build like this with 1500 blocks, even if we optimistically just add 2 kilos to each block, that's an extra 3 tons of material to shift. Not to mention problems that you run into later down the line, since the walls are so wet you can't get on with anything. This is even worse for trench blocks, which can weigh in at almost 25 kilos each when they're wet. So all of our concrete blocks are covered up with tarpaulins. These trench blocks were finished with, so I'm not particularly bothered about those trench blocks. We do still have some engineers under there. We're nearly done with the engineers, to be honest. That's just the last of them. But I'll keep them dry in the meantime. We've got loads of cut-off blocks and like broken bits, and they're quite useful for cuts. It saves just wasting the block, basically. So if there's any damaged blocks, I've got them all covered up as well. Needless to say, all of our insulation, and what else have we got under there? Cement mixer. Things like the power supply and extension and all that are all covered up. If possible, chuck a bucket over those just to keep them extra dry. Or ideally, take them inside somewhere because you really don't want those things getting wet. But they're staying nice and dry under there, so I'm quite happy with that. All of the blocks that are stacked out ready to lay are all covered up, so they hopefully shouldn't get too wet. I've got mortar sitting under buckets. I've got mortar sitting under spot boards just to try and keep it vaguely dry. And then we'll get on to things like the cavity. Now, pop down in the comments if you work on a building site, what do they do with the cavities? Because I've seen a lot of sites where they don't bother covering up the cavities while the houses are getting built. I personally much prefer to keep the cavity covered, because at the end of the day that insulation is going to get soaking wet. Even if it's water resistant insulation, it's all running down the cavity and just kind of pooling at the bottom. Yes, okay, some of it might run out of weak vents and stuff, but I do think it's good practice to try and keep the cavity dry if it's raining heavy. And especially this is quite fresh block work here, so all I've done is I've run a scaffolding board across the top there to try and keep the top level vaguely dry, because this cement is still quite wet. And all of this as well helps to just keep the mortar joints nice and dry, because if it's really heavy rain, it will really muck up the jointing on the brickwork. So again, chat to your bricklayer. The bricklayer might have a preference on how they want to protect their brickwork in the event of rain. So do check with your bricklayer what they prefer. Don't go covering everything up without checking with them first. Check with your builder as well. If you've got a builder who's doing all the work for you, like a central contractor, check what they want to do. As I say, it should really be their responsibility if they're managing the entire project for you. But if you're managing the project, it's probably going to fall down to you to do this sort of stuff. In terms of what to use, anything really. I've got like some old windowsill board here that I'm using that works really well. I've also got some old offcuts of like fascia board over there that works pretty well. Be careful with big heavy tarpaulins and things, especially if the brickwork or blockwork's quite fresh, because if it gets caught in the wind it can act like a big sail and it can potentially just pull the whole wall down. So be careful that it's not too heavy, the kind of stuff that you use. And obviously brickies like to use I think it's like a Hessian cover sometimes, but I'm not sure if that really helps if it's really heavy rain. But again, pop down in the comments below. My brickie, I had a chat with him and he said just cover it with whatever you've got just to protect the cavity a bit. He wasn't too worried about it, but it just makes life a little bit easier when he comes back and everything's not soaking wet. This also neatly leads onto this Proplex stuff, which is fantastic. It's only about £4 a sheet or something like that. I've just bought it from Wix, but you can buy it anywhere. It's just like a corrugated plastic, and it comes in 8x4 sheets, so pretty standard size sheets, and you can shove this everywhere. So I'm using this a lot for covering cavities up. It is very lightweight, so you'll need to keep something on top of it to stop it blowing away. But again, it just keeps the cavities dry until the roof is on, and it means the house has got less drying out to do. So I think it's good practice. Let me know what you think in the comments, but I do think it's worth covering the cavities if you've got really heavy rain forecast. And the other thing with the Proplex is that you can chuck it down on the ground, and it really helps to stop the ground just turning into an absolute mess of mud everywhere, because there's nothing worse than having to work in sticky, slippy, it's quite dangerous to be honest. Ideally, if you can backfill around the whole property with like a sub-base of some description, like stone, then that's the ideal solution. But around here, I need to dig all of this out for a drainage run, so I don't particularly want to be covering it in stone. So instead, I'm using like the Proplex, sometimes using boards and things as well, just to try and make the whole site a little bit more manageable. We've got stone on the inside there, so it's not too bad on the inside, but it's mainly where it gets really muddy around the outside. When the mud's kind of really compacted, if it's like a clay soil, it turns into more of this kind of finish, but even that will eventually become really sticky, slidey mud over time. And when that happens, I would generally suggest don't walk on it until you've covered it up, because it really becomes quite dangerous. It's like an ice rink. It becomes so slippy. And bear in mind that this soil on the right and the soil on the left, it's exactly the same stuff. It's just this stuff on the left is freshly dug up topsoil that hasn't been walked on, and this on the right is stuff that's been compacted down and walked on, and it's turned into a muddy mess. So if possible, leave it untouched and cover it up with something. A couple of quick disclaimers about the Proplex stuff. I don't believe I'm having to actually say this, but you know the kind of age that we're living in. A lot of this is absolutely common sense, but unfortunately common sense seems to have largely gone out the window these days. A few weeks down the line from when I filmed this video, we got hit by Storm Arwen. It was the worst storm I've ever experienced in my lifetime. We had over 90-mile-an-hour winds, which is very, very high for this neck of the woods. There were power outages all over the place. We have family who were without power for 3 or 4 days, and there's a lot of people who were affected much longer than that as well. It was barely in the news, but we're in the north of England, so you kind of get used to that. We kind of do our own thing up here, to be honest. So unfortunately, it's very risky using any sort of cavity covering in very, very high winds, because the wind can just get underneath it and whip it up. Even with big concrete blocks on top of it, the wind will lift it up, and all you end up doing is posing quite a serious threat if someone happens to be walking past when a concrete block falls from the sky. You do not want that to happen. So when the very high winds hit, we had no option but to just remove all of the cavity coverings and just let it get wet. That's what happens on building sites, you know, but we were hoping that we could keep the cavities dry, but we kept them marginally drier than they would have been. But Storm Arwen took its course, and there was not a lot that we can do about that. It's one of the many downsides of doing a build over a winter period, and there's some things that you just can't plan for. So use your common sense. If it's going to be windy, don't put things in places where the wind can blow it and cause someone to get injured. And likewise, obviously the Proplex stuff, it's made of plastic and it gets slippery when it's wet. Once again, you need to use your own common sense as to whether the ground is safer without it or with it. In our case, there were certain areas where it was absolutely beneficial having it, and certainly once it dries out, it's a lot less slippy, and the ground underneath, if it's very muddy, can be protected from just turning into an absolute mess. But you know, this is the sort of thing you need to make your own call on it, depending on the conditions. I'm just saying for what we did, it worked really, really well, but there's certain times that you might want to consider alternatives instead. By the way, the other thing you can do for your downpipe is just shove a bucket under it. If you're not expecting very much rain, it saves having the great big downpipes going across the site, because I generally remove these every morning just to get them out the road of the builders so they're not tripping over them. And then I only connect them up if really heavy rain's forecast. That big bucket there, that'll last quite a long time before it fills up. It's just, you're going to have to keep an eye on it and keep emptying it if it's really heavy rain. But most of the time, I don't have this kind of downpipe extension thing connected unless it's really heavy like it is at the moment, because it does get in the road. So make life easier for your builders and just make the site as accessible and safe as it possibly can be. Another thing you can do as well is build sumps, and sumps are very handy. Basically a hole in the ground that will kind of collect the rainwater, and it's easy to empty the rainwater out of. Once we've concreted this, if I haven't got the roof on, this is going to fill up like a swimming pool every time it rains. So what I'm vaguely thinking of doing is leaving a hole in the concrete that I can potentially put a pump into, or I can just kind of use a bucket or something to get the water out of this, because otherwise it's just going to be one big flat area of water, and it'll be quite tricky to get the water out. So what I might do is, when the concrete's getting poured, I might leave a bucket in the middle, weighted down with a few stones and stuff, just leave a bucket in the middle, and that'll leave kind of a hole in the concrete, and then that'll be a bit of a sump that I can use to get water out. And then once everything's done, it's just a tiny area to fill afterwards, as long as it's, because this is an oversight with a suspended floor over the top, it's purely a cosmetic thing to a degree. So it's going to have the visqueen under it anyway, and then I can just put like a little batch of concrete to fill that hole later on. But it's going to be better than this whole area just filling up with water and not being able to escape anywhere. There you go, folks. I hope you found that useful. Just a few tips from my perspective. I'm not an expert on such things by any stretch of the imagination, but hopefully You can pick up a few things, and hopefully you can learn a few things from the comments from you awesome people as well. So please do post your tips down below as well. What sort of horror stories have you seen on building sites with rainwater, and what sort of other tips can you give for rainwater management when you're doing a construction project? Pop it all down below. For now, as I say, rain stops play, but I've got plenty of other stuff I need to get sorted. I think today is going to be a materials ordering day. I shall see you next time. Take care. Tatty bye.